Hey, thanks for watching today's video. Today's video is sponsored by Humble Games. If you haven't heard, the Humble Bundle is offering some really great games for March. And the games are XCOM Chimera Squad, Elix, and Control, which I actually covered on the show not that long ago. For this month, you can lock in a special price of $12 a month for 12 months for new members. On top of getting a AAA title, you're getting a wide range of 11 other games to play and keep on your PC forever.
So, if you want to sign up for March's Humble Choices and lock in that price for 12 months, you can do so by clicking the link in the box down below. Signing up supports the show.
Again, a big thank you to Humble Games for sponsoring today's video. Now, on with the show.
Everyone who plays games has experienced that feeling of hitting a wall that makes you step away from the game in anger, only to come back later and find that you've learned and grown, or at least that you've just calmed down enough to get over the hump and push your way through to the next super hard boss, just in time to repeat that process over again. With Demon Souls and the follow-up Dark Souls, From Software turned that feeling into not just a series, but an entire genre. And while I found Dark Souls to originally be frustrating the first time around, my journey with this game has mirrored the exact feeling that the game creates, where I've had to push past those initial negative feelings to grow and change and maybe, just maybe, to admit that Dark Souls has been right all along.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Completionist New Game Plus, the show where I am recompleting the original 120 games I ever featured here on the channel. More on that in the box down below. Before we start today's episode, a quick shout out. Next week, please come to twitch.tv/thecompletionist. We are having our charity event, Preserved Play, to raise money for the Video Game History Foundation. It's on the 27th and 28th of March. We have some awesome game devs and YouTubers showing up. We're gonna be playing games. There's gonna be challenges. There's gonna be good times. Come on by. I'll see you there. Today I'm revisiting Dark Souls, which I originally completed for the channel's 100,000 subscribers special, in which I got pulled into an evil Xbox. As you can see, that's not the case this time around. I'm just in a regular, old, non-evil office. But that's not the only thing that's changed this time around. I have a decade of additional experience with FromSoft games now, and I am way better at them. Plus, I've spent ages talking to people like Vati Vidya or TOVG's own Pat, who both have a level of knowledge and enthusiasm about this game and its world that it's infectious. So, I figure the least I can do is return to this game with an open mind and see if my appreciation for it has grown and changed in the way that these games have asked their players to grow and change. And spoiler alert, it has. Let's begin.
When Dark Souls was released in 2011, I had no idea how influential it would end up being, or how ubiquitous the term Souls-like and its associated genre would become. Hell, even the word soul no longer has meaning because I've said and heard it so many times. Released as a spiritual successor to FromSoft's Demon Souls due to the rights being held by different companies, Dark Souls is one of those games that shouts, "I'm not a sequel," while winking at you and wearing a shirt that says, "I'm basically a sequel." But even though it was the second Souls game, it was this installment right here that the Souls games began to take over the gaming world and never really slowed down. When I first completed Dark Souls and had the universal experience of initially being absolutely terrible at it, it was just a game. I gave it one of my combined ratings of complete it or finish it, and then moved on with my life. Or so I thought. But by now, it's a whole vibe that has spread to consume the past decade of gaming. And that vibe is the feeling of throwing your controller against a wall, only to feel really cool a few hours later when you finally beat the impossible boss. And this isn't a feeling that the Souls game necessarily invented, but they weaponized it in a way that I wasn't used to at the time, and was pretty thrown off by it. Not just in terms of the punishing gameplay, but also FromSoft's similarly unforgiving approach to building a story in a world. In a world once ruled by dragons, humanity now reigns supreme in the Age of Fire. But the Age of Fire is dimming, in spite of the sacrifice of Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight. An undead curse has begun to take hold, and the forces of darkness are creeping their way into the world. As one of those wretched undead individuals, it's up to the player to collect enemy souls, fulfill the prophecy, and determine whether the Age of Fire will carry on or be consumed by darkness. But rather than with the traditional narrative, most of this is communicated through little bursts of backstory delivered by the NPCs or implied through design and flavor text. In practice, the story is mostly expressed through the central gameplay mechanics, several of which have become second nature by now. gameplay mostly involves exploring the world and collecting souls while trying not to be killed. And then when you inevitably are killed, trying to get back to that spot so you can collect your souls before they're gone forever. Resting at bonfires acts as a checkpoint that restores your health and spells, but also respawns all of the enemies you worked so hard to kill. This concept felt really new and novel 10 years ago, but now this is an idea that's so widespread it even showed up in a Star Wars game, which is mostly a testament to how solid it is and how fine-tuned the risk-reward balance is in these games. But I'm in a different place than I was a decade ago, and so are these games. In a practical sense, I am much better at them than I was, but FromSoft also has been steadily tweaking and refining the formula ever since Demon's Souls, while keeping the core experience the same. So normally I wouldn't be that excited to revisit a game that I had a kind of muted reaction to, but my relationship to this entire vibe and style of game has altered drastically, which means it may be a whole new experience. And at the very least, I'm probably going to die a lot less, so that doesn't hurt either. So when I first played Dark Souls, I admit that I didn't fully get the appeal. Gradually getting better felt good, and the monsters and world were cool and all, but it was the first one of these games that I'd ever played, and I didn't really care enough to fully throw myself into the lore or to get creative with how I approached the bosses. Just a quick shout out to Chaz and Ryan from a long time ago who helped me. Some of my earliest community friends helped me through playing through this game, and I'm very grateful for what they showed me. The gameplay and the story is all very open and feelings based, and while I was able to put in the time necessary to get good and complete the game, I wasn't sure that it was all that worth it. But now that I've spent 10 whole years continuing down that path, seeping this style of gameplay into my bones and talking to Dark Souls obsessives, I can finally admit that I was wrong about this game in several ways. There's no one forcing you to become obsessed with the vague, nebulous world building that's on display here, or to do what I've done and get good enough to push yourself through multiple playthroughs. But the game is there if you're willing to meet it where it's at, and that requires a level of investment that is immediately going to put some people off, just like it did with me the first time I played it. The story is an open world of decay and sadness, and I wasn't willing to dive into it the first time around. The surface level iconography was still kind of neat, like oh look, a dog with a sword in its mouth, but as a player, my personal preference is for a story and narrative that's a little more guided and specific. But now I realize that I can get more from this game by just throwing myself down the rabbit hole. Because if there is one thing that my life as a completionist has taught me, it's that throwing yourself down a rabbit hole actually pays off sometimes. And that's clearly true for many of my friends who love the mythology and story of these weird-ass games. The story here is the world, and on this playthrough, I was much more able to tap into that. Maybe it's because FromSoft has now branched into other worlds like Bloodborne and Sekiro that I was more able to vibe with. Or maybe it goes hand in hand with the gameplay, which has fully broken me down and rebuilt me multiple times by this point in my Soulsborne life cycle. Because that's still the thing that I love most about this game and others like it. It forces players to change and grow, and makes the process as satisfying as it is infuriating. The trial and error scales up in a way that I was constantly challenged by when I first played this game, even by the time of my third or fourth run. I had learned this game's specific style of combat, sure, but I was still making mistakes. Because it's an RPG, Dark Souls puts less emphasis on leveling up your character than on leveling up as a player, which is cool, but also means pushing through some not so great feelings. But now I realize that those bad and gross feelings are a healthy part of the process, because now, with the benefit of a decade of experience, I didn't have a particularly difficult time with any of the bosses. Years ago, I threw myself at the wall that is these games until I broke through the other side, and now that all my bones have healed, I'm just still there, on the other side of those gross boss fights. It was also helpful knowing this time that I had to complete exactly 2.5 playthroughs, since last time I just kept doing New Game Plus as it got harder and harder, all the way up to New Game Plus 7 without realizing that the rabbit hole had no end and would go as deep as I was willing to travel. But this time I did one playthrough for the good ending, one for the bad ending, and then half a playthrough to get the remaining required boss souls, which I needed in order to finish all of the trophies, which required me to get all of the various weapons and spells. And like almost everything with these games, that's asking a lot, but it's ultimately fair. If it weren't for so many of the trophies requiring more copies of certain boss souls, then 2 playthroughs would have been more than enough, but it's fine. It's half a playthrough. It wouldn't be Dark Souls if it wasn't making things like just slightly more difficult than they needed to be. And I get that now. Even some of the glitches and bugs are now folded into what I enjoyed about the game. I mean, bugs are obviously still bad, but this time I learned how to do a bunch of out-of-bounds glitches that helped me skip several hours on my last playthrough, so I'm not complaining. In general, the open and undirected feeling of this game has become something that I love about it, instead of dreading it like I used to. The player is given all sorts of freedom in not just how they grow and improve, but in how they explore the game and its world. The openness that felt vague and non-committal my first time around now feels like a big gross sandbox for me to play in, and players are much more inclined to grow and improve when they have a say in exactly how they're going to do that. Although the multiplayer in my eyes is still a mess, I get why it's cool in theory. It's the idea of risk-reward, where being in human form allows you to summon other players, but also lets people show up and murder you just for fun. So I spent most of my time in undead form. But again, it's okay because later games either refined, de-emphasized, or completely removed these kinds of elements, so it's easy now to kind of just look past them. Before, I was really frustrated at how difficult the game made it to actually play with a friend. But now I've come to a place of acceptance and don't really care. Because yes, there are things about the game and Soulsborne games in general that still don't completely vibe with me 100%. But now that I have some distance, perspective, and a whole lot more experience, I can see how fully formed the appeal of these games was from the very beginning. Because in the end, Dark Souls is going to do what it does, and it's the player that needs to change and get on the game's level. Because what these games are going for has always been dope, and it's worth the frustration if you're willing to get on the game's level and do what it's asking of you. And if you're not, if the thought of pushing past that moment where you hate the game and yourself and the boss like you're playing, then don't. It's okay. At the very least, you have my permission. But if you get in this game's zone, like I was finally able to, you'll be handsomely rewarded for it. So when I say you'll be rewarded for it, I obviously mean that on a personal, metaphorical level, rather than an actual sort of tangible reward, because that is not something this game has. And personal growth is cool and all, but it's even cooler when it also comes alongside a super dope weapon or suit of armor. And sure, there are the boss weapons, which are very dope, but they don't really count. And since there's no real bonus, stopping halfway through my third playthrough when I got my last achievement felt sort of anticlimactic, like, okay, I'm done now, I guess. I'll go outside. And yeah, look, I get it. The real reward here is the frustrating breakthroughs we made along the way, and that's fine. Really, it is. But I never complained about an extra super dope sword. Just saying. Especially on this playthrough, since these games are now second nature enough that I'm no longer unlocking new levels of gameplay. So something to unlock in a more literal sense would have been cool. But overall, even without a completion bonus, I am way more on board with this game than I used to be. I get what these games are going for now, and they were right all along. It was never up to the game to change, but for me to change, which is only fitting. Because it's true that while I wasn't really still leveling up as a player, it was cool to fire up this game and realize how much more accepting and capable I had become. When I recompleted Dark Souls Remastered on the PS4, there were 22 deaths. Now this was way fewer than last time, and not just because I did way fewer playthroughs. I definitely did have a much stronger sense of how to survive, but this is still Dark Souls, so obviously deaths are gonna happen. 72 spells acquired, including 24 miracles, 20 pyromancies, and 28 sorceries, plus 17 boss souls weapons crafted. All of this was the same as last time because it's necessary for the trophies. And speaking of which, 41 trophies unlocked. This time I was able to do these much more efficiently, getting the last ones halfway through my third playthrough as the absolute last thing I did. 30 hours of total playtime, which once again is way less than last time because I unnecessarily did 7 playthroughs before, shaving off 70 hours. Please leave me alone. And 0 controller-shaped holes in my wall as a result of replaying this game, which is how I know personally I've grown as a person.
You know, I can admit when I'm wrong, and while I still think it's fine if these games don't necessarily click for everyone, I can see now that most of my issues with it have been worn away with time and familiarity. Because in the end, Dark Souls was right. These games rule the world now, and I'm totally on board thanks to the insight and enthusiasm of the awesome community that has sprung up around these games. So now that I know it only takes 2.5 playthroughs to fully complete this thing, I have no reservations about my final thoughts. At the very least, though, I will add that I'm not the biggest fan of how the story is told through the architecture. That's just a me thing. I personally love when stories present themselves exactly as they see. Linear storytelling is my jam. I'm down to get weird, but not all the time. So, With that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of finish it.
Finish it!